Welcome to this month's Agility Learning Lab. For this month, we're going to be going over Serial and Batch Builder. This is one of the best ways inside of WiSys and Agility WMS to, I guess, really automate and optimize a process. It causes a lot more efficiency whenever creating new serial tracked or batch tracked items. It cuts down on user error and speeds up the whole process by automatically creating those serial and batches. So we'll get into all that, all the ins and outs of how to set this up. It'll probably be a little bit of a faster session for our agility learning labs, but I'm still thinking, probably around 40 minutes, something like that. So there's still plenty of content to cover today. All right. So before we get into that, I always like to introduce myself. So hi, everybody. I'm Chase Linson-Migler. If you haven't been here before, it's nice to have you attending a session. I always like to leave my camera on for introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and turn that off now so you can focus on the content and there's not too much on your screen here. All right, and what I do here at WiSys is I manage all of our partner enablement. So I'm a former customer-facing consultant. I brought my skills with our product over to the partner side, really with just the goal in mind of continuing to build our educated partner channel here. We have a lot of really great partners that know the ins and outs of the product, and our big goal at WiSys was to give them as many resources as possible. So that's what I do over here. I work with partners to just help them be as strong with the product as possible. And I've said we've been pretty successful with that so far. In addition to that, I do these learning labs. They'll be on the second Tuesday of each month, same time, 2:30 to 3:30 EST. I always like to throw that out there too, because the feedback I've gotten is that a lot of people want to make sure they're here for every session, but it can be difficult because things are always in flux. I'm trying to figure out what the learning lab is going to be in the weeks leading up. So we only send out the invite about a week in advance. So if you want to make sure you have that time available, I work really hard to adhere to that schedule. So they will be planned for the second Tuesday of each month, 2:30 to 3:30 EST moving forward. And for my partners that are on the call today, I'm a dedicated resource for you guys. So if you're not working with me currently, I just want you to be aware of the services that are out there. I do introduction training with all of our partners. That's just going through all the ins and outs of the product, much deeper than what we're able to cover in things like these learning lab sessions or YouTube videos, right? So we go through all the ins and outs of the product and introduction training. I do in-depth training with my partners on design tools just to help you get strong with the tool set and enable you to tailor the product for your customers. And all my customers on the call today, I'm sure you can attest that there's a lot you can do with WiSys. So having that strength in the design tools is very helpful. And then lastly, I'd like to get standing team meetings with my partners as well for continued enablement, and that can be anything from going through your current WiSys questions or issues list, talking about a specific customer's process or tailored apps for a partner or for a customer, anything of that nature, right? Just a standing meeting to answer all your WiSys questions and keep an open line of communication between each other. So if you're a partner and you're on the call today and we don't have anything going together right now, reach out. Let's get something set up. I love to talk to all you guys and just try and keep that communication open. And I think it helps everybody win in the situation. So I'm always available for all my partners on the call. All right, so let's get into today's lab, serial and batch builder. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to start with the manual serial and batch entry process. I know for some of you that might be a little redundant. You're used to the forms and you understand how they work, right? But I think it's good to touch on what that process looks like, just standard out of the box first, so that you can see the real difference when we turn on serial and batch builder and get an understanding of the comparison for using the applications with and without serial and batch builder. So we'll start on the manual serial and batch entry process. Then we'll get into what serial batch builder is, all the options you have in there, how to set it up, right? We'll go through the ins and outs of that and set up a couple of rules here in my system. And then we will use serial and batch builder on the handheld applications. So we'll use it on those same out of the box applications that we're going to talk about for the manual entry process. And then whenever we're done with that, I am going to show you guys a little bit of Form Studio and how those actions look on the background. So for all of my partners or super users on the call, anybody who's interested in the design tools, we'll do a quick 10 minutes or so at the end of the session here today on what the background of this looks like so that you're able to turn this on and make adjustments to it as needed. Because there may be some situations where you want to make an adjustment to how it works on the out of the box form, or maybe you tailor your own GRPO form and you want to make sure you add this in or something like that, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that in Form Studio to make sure you're enabled to go in there and use this wherever you want to, now that you know the full power that's out there with Serial and Batch Builder. All right, so we're going to start here with SAP. All right, now I'm actually going to start with a purchase order here. Again, we're going to go through the manual, serial, and batch entry process first. So I'm going to go ahead and receive in this purchase order 875. And again, the goal here is just to really hone in and focus on what's happening with the batched item. So for today, just to keep continuity and for the sake of time, I'm just going to use the same batch tracked item the whole way through, and that'll make everything run smoothly here, and it's going to be easy to see the differences. So our batched item is B10,000 for my purchase order 875. I'm going to do a goods receipt of that. So I'm going to go back to my desktop here. Today I'm going to operate out of Form Studio just because we're going to go into Form Studio and look at some things in the background. So we'll just use the same tool here. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And if you weren't on our session last month, or if you haven't seen Form Studio before, this is the product where we tailor our application and make changes to the actual handheld forms. But it also has a nifty simulation function. So really, I'm going to go in here and just show you exactly what it looks like on the handheld, right? So I'm going to go to Agility Essentials here. That's just all of our standard applications. And I'm going to go to my goods receipt PO. And here you'll see this is the out of the box goods receipt PO form, exactly how it looks on the handheld for you. I'm going to simulate. All right, and here, this is a little bit for testing when you're in Form Studio making changes to an application, but if I just pull that in, now you have exactly the screen that you would have on your handheld just here on my computer, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and go through the process here. So I have purchase order 875. Actually, I have a barcode for it, so I'm just going to scan that in here. And then whenever I scan my item here, B10,000, it'll take me down to my batch field next. So scan that. And now in this case, when I have manual, serial, and batch entry, it's looking for me to identify what the batch number is. Now, in this case, I am most likely, just a warehouse worker who's using this form, receiving in the items, right? So keep that in mind, who's actually going to be using this on your warehouse floor or on your customer's warehouse floor. So the warehouse worker scans in the order or types in the order, scans in the item they're receiving, and now they'll be prompted to enter in the batch number for the item. Now, this batch number could just be, what the manufacturer gives you. So maybe you're just copying in a batch number that's listed on a label on the product or something like that. Maybe you have rules for how you want to set up the batch. If it's anything like that, where they're going to have to manually key it in, they'll just type it in here, or even scan if they did have a label or a sheet of batch numbers printed out to scan on, right? But they do have a second option, and that's to utilize this lookup here. And the reason for that is this lookup is going to show you everything in the receiving bin in this case, and you'll see whenever we use the production order form to do a production receipt, we can also use that lookup to see everything in the production bin, right? And the reason being is, let's say you use the same batch for every item received in on that day. Or let's say, maybe you have the same batch on 3 different trucks that are on 3 different orders, and you want to just go back and assign more items to a batch you already created. This would give you an easy way to go in here and select it from the list and make sure you have that batch copied the exact same way so it looks correct and you're using the exact same batch, right? So you have those 2 options. You can manually key it in, scan that back in. You can manually key it in here, or you can use your lookup to copy a batch that exists in your receiving bin in this case, right? So I'm going to go ahead and manually key one in and hit enter. And now I can just put in the quantity that I want to receive in and save it in post. But before I do that, I want to mention the downsides of this. This is all important to note so that we can see the upgrade that Serial and Batch Builder is. So first off, when we're manually keying this in, if we have roles for what the batch should be, or if we have maybe the batch is printed out on a sheet of paper or it's on the product, on a tag on the product, something like that, first off, you have human error there. So we're relying on the warehouse worker to type this in or to know what the role is for how they create the batch, right? So there's no automation there. We're relying on a human being to type this in and actually enter in the correct batch. So there's always potential for error there. The second piece of that is when we have that lookup available, you open yourself up for someone to accidentally select the wrong batch from that lookup and from that list of batches, or even just use that lookup and quickly select a batch to essentially shortcut the process rather than looking at what the actual batch number should be. They're just grabbing an existing batch number and it passes the eye test and they go ahead and move forward with that. So you got to remember the potential downsides there and who's using the form in the actual process. But now I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK. I'm going to do 1 and post that. Now I'm going to have my GRPO over in SAP. And just real simple, right? If I go to the relationship map, grab my GRPO, and look at my batch number transactions report, you'll see that batch I manually keyed in there, that 548, right? So pretty simple. That's how you would expect your WMS to function if you're manually keying it in, right? You want that to write back to the GRPO. I'm going to show you here, same thing. If I go over to goods receipt, it's going to be a really similar formula here. So I'm going to scan in the batched item that I want to receive in again. And I'm going to pick a bin in this case. I'm going to go ahead and scan the bin I'm doing it to. And now, once again, same two options. I can type in my batch or I can look at the lookup. Now, in this case, it's important to note, if you're doing goods receipt, there's potential, let's say, this is an item that somebody found on the floor. It fell underneath of the shelf and they want to add it to the system. In that case, there's a good chance that it goes with an existing batch. So you may want to utilize the batch lookup, or maybe there's a tag on it already. So you just want to key in what's on the label or the tag. So you have those two options there. But once again, when you're relying on the user to follow those rules and add that batch number in, you're opening yourself up to that manual entry user error there potentially. So once again, I'm just going to key in a batch that I want to add. Very simple, just like our first form. Hit save. I can print my label out here. It's my little goods receipt item label there. And if I jump over to SAP and I go to my inventory transactions and my goods receipt, take a look at my batch number transactions again, we'll see 844, the batch number that I added there. And lastly, kind of the same process, but again, I just want to set this groundwork, right, for what it looks like out of the box with no serial and batch builder so we can see the difference. Let's go ahead and do a production order quickly too here. So we have this production order 612. Gonna jump over to Form Studio. Now, again, this isn't a Form Studio session. I'm going to show you some little things in Form Studio, and that's why I'm in here. But if you need to know where to find this, it's in our production folder here because it's a production form. I'm just going to go to production receipt. And again, I have to manually key that in this time. So first I'm going to go to my production order. So I'm just scanning my label there for that 611, my production order there. And I have those same two options. Now, going back to what I said earlier, this looks at your production bin, right? So I could pull a batch that exists in that production bin, say every product that I do for the day has the same batch number, and I'm just coming in here and doing a different production order that needs done today, but it's supposed to have the same batch. I could use that lookup and go select the batch from the list, and then I know it's correct. Or I can manually key it in based on the rules I have or however we want to set up the batch. So here, just type that in, do a quantity of 1, and now I'll have my production receipt in SAP, but just one more time to bring it home. Manual user entry there. It's an extra step in the process. That extra step can be a lot longer than just scanning or keying a number in, because the user actually has to think about or ask someone in some cases, hey, what should the batch number be for this? They have to think about the rules, which opens them up to, potential entry issues, right? If they aren't 100% aware of the rules. So you open yourself up for some downsides there whenever you have to use the manual entry process. So if I jump back to SAP, just one more time. Oh, I'm on the wrong production order here. I did 611. So if I go to my receipt from production and I look at my batch number transactions report, there's the one that I manually keyed in again. So pretty simple. That's how it works out of the box. Again, kind of just setting the groundwork here, right? There's your refresher. If you haven't been in the forums recently, that's the standard process flow with serial and batch builder not enabled if you don't have any rules set up or anything like that. But now we have some new orders. We're going to go ahead and set serial and batch builder up with some different rules in here, and I'll show you all the ins and outs of that. Then we're going to see what it looks like. Okay, so first I'm going to go back to my desktop here. I'm going to go to Agility Explorer. That's our desktop product. If you're not familiar with it, that's also kind of your hub where you can go in there and adjust any settings and set up users and do any of that stuff that you need to do. I'm going to go to File. Inside of File, I can go to Options, and that gives you access to all of your settings and user setup and things like that. And then I'm going to go down to WMS and go to serial and batch numbers. All right, so here in serial and lot builder, we have, there's kind of two pieces of criteria for your rules. There is the package, or we could say the functionality, and that is what type of product is being created, right? So that could be production, that could be purchase order, or that could be inventory maintenance, which is like a goods receipt. And then we have, is it serial or batch? So we can do all three of those options for serial. We can do all three for batch. So you could have a total of 6 rules that you set up in here. 3 different serial rules, 3 different batch rules. I'm going to go down to new. And now I can go ahead and start adding a rule. So first here, we see here's the packages again: production, purchase order, inventory maintenance. We'll start with production, and underneath production, I have batch and serial. And again, just to keep it easy today, I'm just going with batch stuff. Serial looks very similar. We're going to talk about the small difference at the end of the session here, but just for time's sake and going through with continuity, we're just doing batch. So I'm going to add my first role here. And whenever we're adding roles, we have a bunch of different options for the type of role we can have. So the first one I add is first in the sequence. And here are all the different types. So I could add a static global, set of characters at the beginning or end or in the middle, whatever I want to do, right? So I could have static global characters. I can actually look up information. So in this case, I can look at the item master, the warehouse, or the production order and pull information from SAP and put that into my batch number. And we will do that. You'll get an example of that because that's probably the most unique and interesting of these options. You can do a date, a time, a global sequence of numbers or characters, a year, a month, a day, Julian date, Julian day, and then you can also do the day of the week, starting with Monday or starting with Sunday. So you have a variety of options here for how you can set up your batch number. I'm going to start with something simple. I'm going to go with day of the week first. So this is for production. So first thing I want to see is, starting with Monday, what day of the week am I, actually performing the production of this item, right? So here I'm going to start with day of the week. It's just going to be one number, and with it being Tuesday, it'll be a 2. Then next in the sequence, I'm going to add the actual date. So it'll be an 8-character date. 4 characters for the year, and then 2 for the day, 2 for the month, as you would expect. And I do have the option after I add this, I can move it to first if I want to by clicking this arrow here, or move it back down to second, whatever I want to do. All right, and now at the end here, I'm going to do a static global single character, And let's say that, I have 3 different companies in SAP that are essentially using the same facilities, right? So in this case, each company is going to have a static character at the end of the batch to tell me which company that batch was made in. So let's say this is my company A. So I'm going to do a static character for A at the end. So now I know, okay, the day of the week this was made, which will be a Tuesday, which is a 2, the actual date it was made, and then at the end I have that static global character there of A so that I know, okay, company A in SAP made this. Okay, that's all good. I can hit OK here. Let's close this out. And now we see our rule here for production. Day of the week, 1 character, date, 8 characters, and then 1 static global character there of A. So there's my production rule. Now, let's say for purchase orders and inventory maintenance, I'm going to use the same rule. So when I'm actually making the product, I want 1 batch. Then I want to use the same rule for creating batches for, both times that I'm bringing something in. So purchase order or, a goods receipt, something like that, where I'm bringing in the product, I'm not making it on the spot. I want a different batch rule for that. But first, just so you can see here too, batch drops off of the list for production now because we can only have 1 rule for, batch production there. So it drops off of the list. That's our 1 rule, right? All right. So now we're going to go to purchase order, sticking with batch. And in this case, I'm going to make it a little bit more unique here. So first, we're going to do that static global character first this time. So we're going to precurse it with that A, just telling me again, company A and SAP created this this unit of this item. All right. Then after that, I'm going to go ahead and do a lookup. So now you're going to get a sense for how the lookup works. So here, if I go to my lookup table/column, we have several different tables in SAP available to us. So in this case, when we looked at production, we had the item warehouse, and then info from the production order, just those 3 options. Now, when we're talking about an actual GRPO and we're receiving an item, we have item warehouse, and purchase order. So, kind of matching what we had there for production. But then we also have the addition of business partner information that we can pull, or we can also pull purchase order line information. But in this case, I'm going to keep it nice and simple here. I'm going to go to my item master, and I'm going to do the first 4 characters of the item's code. So here I'm going to click on length. I'm going to increase that if I can. Well, let's see. It's probably because that's only going to be 1 character. So let me go down to my item code here. And this is going to be in alphabetical order. So I'm just scrolling down till I get to item code. All right, yeah, so that field that I was on was only going to be 1 character. That's why I couldn't adjust the length. So now I have the length of 4 for item code. So I'm going to just take the first 4 characters of my item code. That's going to be after my static global A. And then lastly, once again, I want the date. I like to have the date on there so I can see the actual day that they brought it in. So I'm going to bring in the date here. So this time we're going to have a 13 character batch with A, then the first 4 of the item code, and then the date there. If I hit OK, I'm going to just repeat that same exact style here for my actual goods receipt as well. So we'll do static global A, item lookup, item master. And in this case, you see when it comes to goods receipt, there's no additional document with it. There's no tie back to the business partner in this case because we don't have that purchase order. So we're just looking at the item and the warehouse the item's in. Those are the only 2 tables we can do a lookup from. Go to my item master here, scroll down a little bit, and find my item code. Item code. Change the length to 4 characters. And lastly here, we're going to do date again. Hit OK. Close out of this. So there's my 3 batch rules. Again, you could also add 3 serial rules. There can be a total of 6 in here. If we look at each of them, for inventory maintenance and purchase order, It's going to be exactly the same there. Going to have a static A, going to have the first 4 of the item code, then I'm going to have the date, 8 characters for the date there. For production though, I'm going to do the day of the week, which it starts with Monday, so today's Tuesday, it's going to be a 2. Then I'm going to do the actual date, and then I'm going to end it with that static character A. And again, I'm using that A to dictate, okay, this was made by company A in SAP. I have 3 different companies in SAP. There'd be A, B, and C, you know, and that helps me know who actually created the product or received in the product. All right, I'm going to hit OK. Those changes are now saved in WiSys. I have those roles set. You can see they're still here. Now I'm ready to go. I can go use Serial and Batch Builder. So jumping back to SAP first here. Now I'm going to do another purchase order. It's just a duplicate of the original. So I'm just going to receive in 5 of that B10,000 batched item. This purchase order 876 here. Just sticking in Forum Studio. So I'm going to go to Agility Essentials, Distribution, and back to my goods receipt PO. And I'm going to simulate. So now I can go ahead and use this here. So again, now this little screen is exactly what you would see on the handheld. That's what you'd be looking at. I'm going to start by scanning in my new purchase order, 876, my item B10,000. And now you see when I scan the item in, it automatically triggered that batch creation. So let's look, is this the right batch? Does this follow the rules that we set up, right? So this is for our purchase order. It starts with an A, right? If I jump back here to my rules, my purchase order, I'm starting with that static global A. The next 4 should be the first 4 characters of the item code, which would be B100. If I jump back, once again, we see B100, and then we end with that 8 character date. We have the year 2024, Happy New Year, 0109. That batch got created automatically based on those rules I set up, and all the user has to do then, in this case, if we start back from the beginning, 2 scans, and then type in the quantity this time, instead of having to worry about what's the batch, key in the batch correctly, maybe ask their manager what the batch was, or look for a label or a sheet that tells them the batch, right? It's just automatically getting generated. So again, how much faster is it this time? Scan, batch is created, type in my quantity of 5, hit enter, and I'm good to go. I received in the product. Now, if I post that in, once again, we can jump back to SAP. We'll skip the labels. If I jump back to SAP and refresh, my goods receipt PO is now closed, or my purchase order is now closed. I can go to my goods receipt PO here and check the batch transaction report. And there is my automatically generated through Serial and Batch Builder, my automatically generated batch number there. So you can see it's real smooth. The automation and the time saving with this is pretty apparent right away, right? It automatically gets created. There's no potential for error there. We have what we need as far as a batch number is concerned. So let's repeat the process here. I want to jump back to Forum Studio. Let's repeat the process here with goods receipt then. So with goods receipt, same thing here, pretty simple. I scan in my item and it's going to automatically generate that batch even before I select a bin in this case, because the rules are set up based off of the item, right? That's the number one thing you got to remember. So, and when we talk about how to set this up in Forum Studio, we'll look at this even deeper, but the rules for the batch are based on the item number. In most cases, you know, in this case, it could be item or warehouse. Both of those pieces of information are given to us already. On the last case, you know, that got populated after we selected an item because it could be item or order or warehouse. We know the warehouse based on the selected order. So we had order, item, warehouse, that's already populated. Then the batch gets automatically generated. So in this case, I need warehouse and item. I have warehouse already. I'm going to feed it item now, and the batch will be created automatically before I even select a bin. And there we go. Once again, we have the same role here. So we want to have the same batch number, and you can see it is that same batch number, that A, B100, and then the date there at the end. And now I'm just going to scan a bin to sign it into. So in this case, 2 scans, again, and then enter in my quantity. Let's say I'm receiving in 2 of that, and I can print my label if I want to. There it is. And now once again, if I jump to SAP here, go check out my transaction, my goods receipt, and check my batch numbers. Once again, there's our automatically generated batch number from WiSys. So now let's go look at that slightly different case here of production order that functions a little bit differently. So now we're going to use this production order of 612. I'm going to go back to my production project, do my production receipt here. So in this case, we need to create the batch, to generate the batch, we need order, and that's simply it, right? Because the order tells us what the item is that they're producing, it gives us the warehouse information, and then it gives us the order information. Those were the 3 pieces of information we had access to for production, and simply by scanning in the order, we get all of that information, right? The order has the finished good we're expecting to create, so it has the item information and it has the warehouse that the order is for. So if I scan in my order here, we'll see my batch automatically generated. Bam, there it is. And in this case, for production receipt, now it's a simple 2-step process here. I just enter in or scan in the order, and then I just tell it how many of the finished good I created. So, I would just type in 1 here, and I can hit enter and create the production receipt. But first, let's make sure this batch looks correct. So if we go back to our role here, we want to start with day of the week. It's Tuesday, that should be 2. Then we want to have that 8-character date, and we want to end with our static global character of A. So if we look again, we have our date. We start with our 2 actually for our day of the week, our Tuesday. So 2, and we have our date 2024-0109, and then our static global character of A. So I can hit OK there and add that production receipt here into SAP. Got my label. Jump back to SAP. And I'm just going to my relationship map and opening up the receipt that's associated with that production order. If I'm zipping too fast through this and it leaves some questions, just let me know afterhand. Just reach out to me directly and we can talk about it even more. All right, so here's my receipt from production. Going to pull up the batch number transaction report here. And there's our correct batch number automatically generated from WiSys. So you guys see now how to create these batch number rules, right? You make the rule in there, it causes the automation to happen because we just adhere to the rule, right? You tell us how that needs to function and we make it function that way, and it automatically generates that batch for you. You see the difference between how the out-of-the-box form works and how the form works with serial and batch builder turned on instead of manual entry. But now let's talk a little bit about what this looks like in Form Studio. This is especially useful for my super users and partners out there, but for everybody on the call, it's good to know and be aware of how this works so that you can understand how you can utilize this, the different ways you can utilize it and how you can change it, right? So let me jump back to Form Studio here. And we're gonna look at the GRPO form. It's a nice, easy, simple one to understand here. So if I jump into GRPO, like I mentioned before, the pieces of information that we had available to us were, we had our order information, our order line info, which comes from right here at the order field. We had our business partner information, which also comes from the order field. We had the item information, and we also had the warehouse information, which comes from the order field here. So at the item level, we will have all of the pieces of information necessary to create our batch. Now, I'm just looking up the item, but you may have a little bit of information from the business partner, then some from the actual specific order, and then some from the item, whatever you have, right? But the last spot where all that information is covered, once we have access to all that information, is at the item level here. So that's where we want this batch creation to take place, right? So if I go to my item and I go over here to my actions, I can just drill into this by clicking these three dots here. And again, for anybody that's not familiar with Form Studio, this isn't necessarily a precursor to today's session, but last month we did do a little Form Studio overview that gave you the building blocks to get in here and get comfortable. So I encourage you to watch that session on our YouTube page after this. That'll just help clear up any questions you may have about Form Studio and what I'm showing you right now. So here inside of the actions that take place whenever we select an item. So we select an item, this list of actions takes place. We have our serial and lot builder here at the bottom. It can be the last action. It's not really dependent on, well, in some cases it may be dependent on anything, on something if we're grabbing the warehouse from somewhere or whatever, right? But it can be last here. It's not going to affect a lot though if we move it around a little bit, but I would typically leave it there toward the end of the train here. And we notice there's a formula on this, and it says lotted item, manage batch equals true. So we're looking and we're saying, okay, that item that we selected here, is it true that it is managed by batch? And if that comes back as yes, then it triggers this action of serial and lot builder to happen. So this serial and lot builder transaction I'm going to drill into is this one right here. I can't create one from scratch because you can only have one, per field here. So you can't do multiple serial and lot builder transactions there. So I have this set up to create with batches. If I drill into it here, I have to feed it that same information we set up when we were making our roll. So I'll tell it, okay, this is for purchase orders, but I could, let's say I wanted to use the same roll for every single potential way that an item is created in my inventory, right? And I only want to set it up once instead of doing what I did when I duplicated inventory maintenance and production order, and they had the exact same batch setup. Let's say I just want to set it up once. I set it up as production order, and I want to use that same way to create batches for everything. I could technically switch it here, but you may have some lack of information and you don't have access to quite as much as you could with purchase order there, but you do have the ability to switch this to any module type you may want to. But here, of course, I'm going to stick with purchase order because this is a purchase order and that has the most information. What I mean when I say that is, remember, this allows me to access order information, order line information, business partner information, item information, and warehouse info, where like your production order, for example, only allows you to see order information, item warehouse information, and item info. So there's the most information possible here when you're doing the purchase order version. And this is for a batch or a lot. Those two terms are interchangeable. Of course, if you're not familiar with a lot, lot is a batch number essentially. So we're going to keep lot here. And then we got to tell it what field to create that batch for. So in this case, it's automatically created for, that regular batch field, and then it writes back to be the actual batch number in SAP. But say we're taking advantage of the manufacturer's batch that we have available to us for WiSys, right? If we want to use the manufacturer's batch, we could actually write this into the manufacturer's batch instead. So let's say we want our users to always manually key in a batch, that we have on a sheet. We print out a sheet every day. Here's the batch numbers that you're going to be receiving today, right? And they're going to manually key that in. If that's the way you want it to happen for the regular batch, maybe you want an automatic generation to take place for the manufacturer's batch or vice versa. But here, we could change this to write into the manufacturer's batch field instead of the regular batch field. We have that ability to tell it, okay, this automation is going to take place for this piece of information. And in this case, that's the batch number. Now, if I hit next here, here's the information I have to feed it for it to be able to do that lookup process that we've been talking about so much. So here, again, obviously it needs document number to look at the purchase order or purchase order lines or business partner information. It needs item number to be able to access item information, and it needs warehouse number to be able to access warehouse information. And right now, I don't have those all set. So I would actually need to go in here and make sure those pieces of information get assigned. So here in doc entry, and I just know this off the top of my head, if you're creating a Tailor application, you might need something, something different, or if you're doing this yourself, you might need to reach out and ask a WiSys team member what piece of information you need to pull. But I know here my base entry is my doc number, and then I know that I need my warehouse, which is just called warehouse in here. Here we go, warehouse. Those are variables. So now I'm pulling in my base entry number, my warehouse number, and then the item is whatever I keyed in, right? So these come from different places because we're not typing them in anywhere on the form. And this is specifically taking what I typed in on the form. That's why it has an @ symbol. The $ symbol means it's a variable. It's data that comes from another place. The @ symbol means it's a field information I individually entered into the field. And I finish that, and I have my serial and lot builder set up, right? So if I was doing this on my own form, and I was starting from scratch, I'm just clicking this field to be able to add that transaction. It fills in, you pick the options that you need it to do for where your roles are set up. You pick the field it needs to write into. And then you also have to make sure you line everything up on the back end so it can access the correct information it's looking for from the system there. Pretty simple. There's one more piece I wanted to talk about that I promised I'd talk about at the start of this, and that is, okay, there's a slight difference for serials. I acknowledged that earlier. I mentioned that. What is that difference, right? So with serial numbers, that actually causes another form to prompt inside of a form. It sounds confusing. I'll show you what that looks like in a second here. But the reason being is when you are receiving in, let's say we're receiving an order that has a quantity of 10 of a serial tracked item, I'm going to need a different serial for all 10 of those, right? So I want to be able to quickly add all those serial numbers, kind of grocery store style scanning or automatic generation, whatever I do. I want to quickly add all those serial numbers, to the system and then process that transaction as, one line of, 10 of the item with 10 different serial numbers, right? So what that looks like in here, if I go back to my actions on the item field, you'll see there's an open form action, and it calls another form called receive serial numbers. And basically what happens there is when you pick a serial tracked item, it opens up this receive serial numbers form. And in that case, that is where you would have the serial and batch builder take place and create the serial number. So it's just important to note that's why there's this formula here, and we're only looking at batch tracked items for this. Inside of this form itself, we only handle the batch or the non-tracked items, but we do prompt another form to open up that brings in serial numbers, and then that is where the serial and batch builder would take place. So in that case, it takes place in another form. But I just wanted to mention that, and if you try to tailor this yourself, if you have any questions, reach out and we can talk about it a little bit further. But it's just important to note that serial prompts another form to appear, just so you can kind of grocery store style quickly add a variety of cereals, several different cereals, instead of having to go through the form 10 times to add 10 cereals. You can add all 10 in one screen, right? So that's the key difference there. But the main purpose here was to give you a little bit of a taste for what does this look like in Form Studio, so you can set it up if you need to. You can make adjustments to it if you need to, anything like that, right? Just so you have an understanding of what's going on in the background. But just to run back through what all we covered today. So we talked about the manual serial and batch entry process, which again, there's two options to that process. You can use the lookup to find an existing batch number and copy that batch number, or if this were serial, copy that serial number, or you can manually key in, or actually, never mind, with serial, you can't copy the serial number. My apologies there. Or you can manually key in the batch, and with serial, you're always going to manually key it in, right? You're asking the user who's using the application at that point in time to do that. So you want to make sure you're aware of who's going to be prompted to do those things if you decide to stick with the manual entry option here. You want to make sure you know who's going to be doing that, and you're relying on that user to enter that correctly, avoid any potential entry errors there, right? To understand your batch rules and be able to correctly apply your batch rules. And also you're trusting them not to use that lookup and essentially skip a step by grabbing a batch from the list, even if that's not the correct batch, right? So there's a couple of downsides there, in addition to the fact that it's not automatically happening. So someone's going to have to think about this, decide what the batch number is, and key it in and assign it to the item. So there's some downside to the manual serial and batch. There are customers that have to use it. I understand that. But if you can automate it, you want to automate it, and we can do that through serial and batch builder here. We talked about the different roles. Again, you have the ability to set up 6 different serial and batch builder roles, 3 for batches, 3 for lots, and those 3 options are production, purchase order, and inventory maintenance. So you have the ability to set up 3 apiece, and those roles can have all different things. Most are date and time related, but you can add static sequences and static characters to it, as well as information lookup based on the item and order. And then lastly, we looked at how those work on the handheld. We looked at the difference in functionality and how much faster it is than the manual entry, the fact that you lose a whole step there, because we're able to automate that step and take it out of the user's hands. And we looked at it in Form Studio just to get a better understanding of the foundation for, okay, how does this work in the background? Is it possible to make adjustments to this? Yes, of course it is possible. You know, basically, how do we set this up if anybody else is going to be setting this up on a, you know, tailored custom form or anything like that, and just get that concrete understanding of what that looks like behind the scenes and how we automatically generate those batches. So I knew it was going to be a little bit of a quicker session today. Oh, we're at about 45 minutes or so here, so we have a few minutes for questions. Before I get to that, though, for any additional enablement, any questions about serial and batch builder and how you can leverage it, any of that stuff, reach out to me directly. Love to talk with you guys. I love to get feedback. Also, if you like the lab, just reach out and let me know if it was helpful. But you know, anything at all, reach out. I'd love to help you guys. And it looks like, let me see here in the chat. We did have one question. My colleague Aaron was here, and he opened up with that, but the question was just about the batch being automatically assigned. And just to reiterate, once those roles are set up, everything is automatic, right? If you have that role set up and that action is turned on in Form Studio, like we showed, which out of the box it is. So if you're using a standard WiSys form, it's there, it's ready to go. Once that role is set up, that batch automatically gets created. And as you saw through the process, when we save and post our GRPO or our production receipt or our goods receipt, right? When we finish those documents and the document is created in SAP, that batch number will be there automatically generated from WiSys. And it is also important to note one other thing in Form Studio. I didn't really talk about this, but you know, out of the box, we're forcing the user to use that automatically created batch, because that's typically how you're going to want it to be. You want to take that out of their hands and make them use the automatically generated batch. But if for some reason you wanted the user to have the ability to backtrack and clear out that batch and write in their own, maybe there's some cases where you have to do that, you know, maybe 90% of the time you want the batch to automatically be generated and you're going to use that automatically generated batch, but every so often you might need to type in your own for some reason. We can add that ability as well. You can put a clear stop on the field, so you can clear up to the batch field, right? It'll only clear the batch information out. You can type in a new batch for the item and then hit enter and then enter in your quantity. So you do have the ability to bypass this if there's certain one-off situations where you don't want it. But all right, yeah, I think that covers everything serial and batch builder related. It doesn't look like I have any other questions in the chat. So If nobody else has anything for me, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. Thanks for your attendance today. And if you have any other questions on Serial and Batch Builder, just reach out and open up the conversation. We can talk about all the different ways we can do it. Thanks, everybody.